In 1893, the world was invited to a dream, the Chicago World's Fair, the White City, a dazzling spectacle of scientific marvels and architectural beauty, built to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas. Millions came to witness the birth of a new, modern age. They came to see the future, but just a few blocks away from this shining beacon of progress. A new, darker kind of future was being engineered. A charismatic young doctor had built a hotel, a marvel of a different sort. It was a labyrinth of staircases that led to nowhere, of soundproof rooms, of secret passages, and gas lines that snaked through the walls. It was a building designed not for hospitality, but for horror. This is the true story of Dr. H. Holmes and his infamous murder castle. It is a story of a man who was not just a killer, but an architect of death. This is a psychological autopsy of a predator who used the trust of a doctor's title to lure his victims into a hotel that was in fact a human slaughterhouse. Before the monster, there was the man. He arrived in Chicago in 1886, not as a phantom in the night, but as a charming and ambitious young doctor. He was born Herman Webster Mudgett, but in Chicago, he reinvented himself with a new, more distinguished name, Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. By all outward appearances, Holmes was the very model of a successful Victorian gentleman. He was handsome, intelligent, and possessed an almost hypnotic charisma. He could charm his way into any social circle, win the trust of business partners, and, most dangerously, captivate the hearts of countless young women who were flocking to the booming city of Chicago in search of work and independence. His profession as a doctor and a pharmacist gave him an almost unassailable air of respectability. In an age when medicine was seen as a noble and almost sacred calling, a doctor was a figure of ultimate trust. People confided in him, they trusted him with their health, and they trusted him with their lives. This trust was the most powerful weapon in his arsenal. From a psychological perspective, H. Holmes was a classic psychopath, a predator hiding behind a perfect mask of normalcy. He was a pathological liar, a master manipulator, and a man completely devoid of empathy or a moral compass. His early life was littered with a trail of insurance scams, fraudulent business deals, and suspicious disappearances. He saw other human beings not as people, but as pawns, as simple tools to be used for his own financial gain and twisted amusement. Upon arriving in the Englewood neighborhood of Chicago, he quickly took over a local drugstore, but his ambition was far greater than that of a simple pharmacist. He had a grander, darker vision. He purchased the empty lot across the street, and as the city began its frantic preparations for the upcoming World's Fair, he began construction on a building that would become his personal theater of horror. It was a massive three-story structure that the locals simply called the castle. To his investors and the public, it was to be a modern hotel, perfectly positioned to profit from the millions of tourists who would soon flood the city. But the construction of the building was a bizarre and secretive affair. Holmes hired and fired countless different construction crews, ensuring that no single group of workers ever understood the building's true, labyrinthine layout. He was the only one who held the complete blueprint. He was the only one who knew the secrets that were being built into the very walls of his creation. The building that rose at the corner of Wallace and 63rd Street was a grotesque architectural anomaly, a twisted reflection of its creator's mind. On the ground floor was a series of legitimate-looking storefronts, including a new, grand pharmacy. But the 2 floors above, which were supposed to contain hotel rooms for the upcoming World's Fair, were something else entirely. They were a labyrinth, a human-sized maze of over 100 rooms, deliberately designed for confusion, entrapment, and death. This was the true anatomy of dread made manifest in brick and mortar. Let's conduct an autopsy on the building itself. The hallways were a disorienting maze, with bizarre sharp-angled turns and staircases that led to dead-end walls. Dozens of the guest rooms were windowless, soundproofed with asbestos, and could be locked from the outside. Holmes had complete control over who entered, and who would never, ever leave. But the true horror was hidden in the details. Holmes, the architect of this nightmare, had installed a series of secret mechanisms and diabolical devices. Many of the rooms were outfitted with hidden gas lines, which he could control from a panel in his office. He could silently flood a room with gas, rendering his chosen victim unconscious or dead without a sound. He built secret passages and peepholes into the walls, allowing him to spy on his guests at all times. He was the all-seeing god of his own small, terrifying universe. Trapdoors were installed in the floors of closets and bedrooms, which opened onto greased chutes that led directly to the building's dark and cavernous basement. A victim could enter a room for the night and, with the pull of a lever, be sent plummeting into the darkness below. The basement was his personal laboratory and disposal unit. It was a scene of industrial horror. It contained a surgical table for dissecting his victims, a massive furnace, or crematorium, powerful enough to incinerate human remains, and multiple pits filled with acid and quicklime to dissolve the bodies of his victims beyond all recognition. He was not just a killer, he was a brutally efficient processor of human beings, using his medical knowledge to strip the skeletons of their flesh, which he would then sell to medical schools and universities. From a psychological perspective, the murder castle was not just a place, it was a physical extension of Holmes's psychopathy. It was the ultimate expression of his need for power and control. He had created a world where he was the puppet master, a world where he could indulge his darkest fantasies with a clinical, detached efficiency. The constant construction and the hiring and firing of different crews was not just a way to keep his secrets, it was a reflection of his chaotic, manipulative nature. As the grand white buildings of the 1893 World's Fair began to rise on the other side of the city, Holmes's dark, black castle stood ready. The fair would bring millions of people to Chicago, including thousands of young, unchaperoned women, drawn by the promise of adventure and employment. They would be looking for a place to stay, and Dr. Holmes, the charming, handsome, and respectable hotel owner, would be waiting to welcome them into his home. The dream of the White City was about to collide with the nightmare of the murder castle. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition was a beacon of progress, a shining white city designed to banish the darkness and celebrate the dawn of a new, enlightened century. It drew over 27 million visitors to Chicago, a massive, swirling river of humanity. And within that river, Dr. H. Holmes saw an endless supply of prey. His hotel, located just a few miles from the fairgrounds, became a prime destination for out-of-town visitors, particularly the thousands of young, single women who had flocked to the city in search of employment and adventure. Holmes, with his handsome features, university education, and the unimpeachable title of doctor, was a figure of charm and authority. He would place advertisements for affordable lodging and for secretarial positions, specifically targeting these new arrivals. They were perfect victims, hopeful, trusting, and, most importantly, completely anonymous. In a city of millions, their disappearance would go unnoticed for weeks, or even forever. Let us now conduct a psychological autopsy of his method. Holmes was not a killer who acted on a sudden, violent impulse. He was a cold, calculating, and patient predator. A young woman would check into his hotel. He would charm her, perhaps promise her marriage or a high-paying job. He often took out life insurance policies on his and female employees, a crucial part of his financial scheme. Once he had gained their complete trust and financial assets, he would put his architectural nightmare into motion. The end would often come in the dead of night. From the privacy of his office, Holmes would turn a valve, sending a silent, invisible stream of gas into the sealed, soundproof room of his chosen victim. Other times, a guest would be instructed to go to a specific room or closet, only to find the floor beneath them give way, sending them plummeting down a greased chute into the waiting darkness of the basement. The horror of the murder castle was its efficiency. It was a fully integrated system for murder and disposal. The victims would arrive in the basement, either dead or unconscious. There, on his surgical table, which he called his dissecting table, Holmes would use his medical skills for their most perverse purpose. He would strip the bodies of their flesh, meticulously cleaning the skeletons. This was not just about hiding the evidence, it was a profitable business. He would sell the pristine, articulated skeletons to medical schools and universities, which were always in need of anatomical specimens. He would sell the organs on the black market. He even sold the bodies themselves for scientific research. He had turned the act of murder into a commercial enterprise, a grotesque inversion of his training as a doctor. He was not just taking lives, he was monetizing them, reducing human beings to the sum of their saleable parts. Throughout the duration of the World's Fair, it is believed that Holmes claimed dozens, perhaps even hundreds, of victims. The exact number will never be known. They were the forgotten souls of the White City, the ones who came seeking a dream and found only a soundproof room and a greased chute. While the world marveled at the technological wonders of the fair, a different, darker kind of modern efficiency was being perfected just a few blocks away, in a hotel that was not a monument to progress, but a testament to the profound and terrifying depths of human evil. The end of the World's Fair in 1893 was the beginning of the end. For H. Holmes, the river of tourists that had flowed through Chicago had dried up, and with it his supply of anonymous victims and easy money. The creditors he had been expertly dodging for years began to close in, and the master of the long Khan was running out of road. In a final, desperate act, he set fire to the top floor of his murder castle, likely in an attempt to collect on the insurance money. But the arson attempt was clumsy, and the insurance company, already suspicious of him, refused to pay. With his empire crumbling and his debts mounting, Holmes abandoned his castle and left Chicago. He was now a man on the run, moving from city to city, leaving a trail of scams, swindles, and suspicious disappearances in his wake. His ultimate scheme was a complex insurance fraud involving his longtime accomplice, a carpenter named Benjamin Petezel. The plan was simple. Petezel would fake his own death, and his wife would collect the $10,000 life insurance policy, which they would all share. But for a psychopath like H. Holmes, sharing was not an option. He saw a greater opportunity. Instead of helping Petezel fake his death, Holmes murdered him for real, burning his body to make the identification difficult. He then collected the insurance money for himself, but this act of profound betrayal was not enough. To ensure there were no loose ends, Holmes embarked on one of the most chilling and heartless chapters of his entire criminal career. He manipulated Petezel's unsuspecting wife, telling her that her husband was still alive and in hiding. He then took 3 of her 5 children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, under his care, promising to reunite them with their father. What followed was a horrifying cross-country journey, as Holmes dragged these 3 innocent children from city to city, all while sending reassuring letters back to their mother. The true fate of the Petezel children is a testament to the absolute depths of Holmes's depravity. The bodies of the 2 girls, Alice and Nellie, were later found buried in the cellar of a house he had rented in Toronto. The boy, Howard, was dismembered, and parts of his body were found burned in a stove in a house in Indianapolis. It was this final monstrous act that would ultimately lead to his downfall. The murder of a business associate was one thing, but the disappearance of 3 innocent children was a crime that would not be ignored. A Philadelphia police detective named Frank Geyer, driven by the pleas of the children's desperate mother, began a relentless, countenance-panning hunt for Holmes and the missing children. It was the first time that a truly dedicated and intelligent investigator was on his trail. Geyer's investigation was a masterpiece of old-school detective work. He painstakingly traced Holmes's path across the country, following the faint trail of rental records, pawnshop receipts, and witness accounts. The hunt for H. Holmes, the charming doctor, had begun. The phantom of the murder castle was finally being dragged out of the shadows and into the light. The chase for H. Holmes ended in Boston in November of 1894. He was not captured in a dramatic shootout. The master manipulator, the man who had cheated death and justice for years, was arrested for a simple case of insurance fraud related to a horse. It was a mundane end to a monstrous career. But while the police had their man, they still had no idea of the true scale of his crimes. They believed they had arrested a clever and prolific con artist. They were about to discover they had captured a monster unlike any America had ever seen. While Holmes sat in a Philadelphia prison for the Petezel fraud, investigators were dispatched to Chicago to search his infamous, now abandoned castle. As they began their methodical floor-by-floor search, a sense of profound dread began to settle over the hardened detectives. The building was not a hotel. It was a factory of death, a physical manifestation of its creator's twisted mind. Newspapers across the country followed the investigation with a horrified fascination. Each day brought a new, ghastly revelation from within the walls of the murder castle. They found the secret soundproofed rooms and the gas pipes. They discovered the trapdoors and the greased chutes that led to the basement. They found a walk-in bank vault designed not to protect money, but to be an airtight chamber for asphyxiation. But the true horror was in the basement. It was a scene from a medieval nightmare. They found the blood-soaked dissecting table. They found the giant furnace, still containing ash and the charred remnants of human bones. They unearthed pits of acid with fragments of human tissue still dissolving within. And scattered throughout the cellar, buried under the dirt floor, they found the skeletal remains of numerous victims, including children. The full, horrifying purpose of the building was now undeniable. Faced with this mountain of gruesome evidence, H. Holmes, the master of lies, did what he did best. He confessed. And then he confessed again, and again. Each time, his story changed. He was a pathological performer to the very end. At one point he claimed to have killed 27 people. At another, over 130. He even confessed to murders he could not possibly have committed. In the end, he created so much disinformation that the true number of his victims remains a mystery to this day. It was his final act of control, a way to ensure that the full truth of his crimes would be a secret he alone would take to the grave. On May 7, 1896, H. Holmes, the man born Herman Webster Mudgett, was executed by hanging for the murder of his accomplice, Benjamin Pataz. He remained calm and eerily detached to the very end. The charming doctor, the brilliant con artist, the architect of the murder castle, was dead. The building itself did not survive him long. It was gutted by a mysterious fire in 1895, and what remained was finally torn down in the 1930s. Today, a quiet post office stands on the ground where the murder castle once cast its dark shadow. The story of H. Holmes is a chilling autopsy of a specific kind of modern evil. He was a product of the Gilded Age, a time of immense industrial progress and profound urban anonymity. He exploited the very things that defined the era: the trust in science and medicine, the chaos of the big city, and the vulnerability of people who came seeking a better life. He was not a passionate killer. He was a cold, efficient, and thoroughly modern monster. His castle may be gone, but the dread he architected, the fear of the charming predator, the monster hiding behind a respectable mask, remains, a permanent and terrifying fixture in the American psyche.